The first crack in my marriage came on a Friday morning, though I didn't realize it at the time. I'd been running late for work, fumbling with my tie in the bedroom mirror, when my wife, Elena, called out from the kitchen. Her tone was unusually soft, almost nervous. "David, can you grab the mail on your way out?" she asked, not meeting my eyes when I passed through the doorway. Her hands were busy folding a dish towel, a nervous habit I recognized but couldn't place. "Sure," I said absent-mindedly, grabbing my briefcase and heading for the door. The mailbox, as always, held its usual mix of bills, advertisements, and a couple of nondescript envelopes. One caught my attention, a creamy white one with a gold seal, addressed to Elena in elegant cursive. The return address simply read, "Exclusive Getaways." I paused, the envelope heavy in my hands despite its light weight. I had never seen anything like it before. Curiosity flickered but was quickly extinguished by the press of time. I tossed the mail on the counter, kissed Elena on the cheek, and headed out, her faint perfume trailing behind me. Hours later, I couldn't shake the image of that envelope. It nagged at the back of my mind as I sat through meetings, reviewed contracts, and stared at spreadsheets that refused to make sense. By the time lunch rolled around, my curiosity had morphed into suspicion. I called Elena, more out of habit than urgency. "Hey," I said when she picked up. "Did you get anything interesting in the mail?" There was a pause, a hesitation so slight I almost missed it. "No, just the usual junk," she replied casually, but her voice carried a slight tremor. "Why?" "No reason," I said, forcing a laugh. "Just curious." The rest of the day passed in a haze of distraction. I left the office early, eager to return home and shake off the unease that had settled in my chest. When I walked through the door, Elena was standing by the counter, the stack of mail gone. "Hey, you're home early," she said, her smile wide but her eyes darting to the empty countertop. "How was work?" "Fine," I said, setting my briefcase down. "I thought I'd beat the rush hour traffic for once." She nodded, her movements brisk as she busied herself in the kitchen. The envelope was gone, but her demeanor only confirmed that something was amiss. I decided to let it go for now, biding my time. That night, while Elena slept, I crept downstairs. My heart raced as I searched through the trash, my hands brushing against empty cereal boxes and crumpled paper towels. Finally, I found it, the envelope, torn open but intact. Inside was an itinerary printed on thick, expensive cardstock. A romantic weekend for two, secluded luxury retreat, exclusive to select guests. Beneath the heading was a set of dates. This weekend, my hands tightened around the paper as I read the rest of the details. A private villa, gourmet meals, and intimate experiences designed to rekindle passion. There was no mention of me. My name was absent from the reservation confirmation, replaced by a single entry, "Guest 2, to be determined." My blood ran cold. The next morning, I pretended everything was normal. Over breakfast, Elena was unusually chatty, filling the silence with meaningless details about her plans for the weekend. A girl's trip, she called it, to unwind and recharge. "Where are you going again?" I asked, my tone light but my eyes locked on hers. "Oh, just a little spa retreat," she said, her voice carefully casual. "Nothing too exciting." I nodded, biting back the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "Sounds nice. You deserve it." Her smile wavered for a fraction of a second before she recovered. "Thanks, David." As soon as she left for work, I made my move. Pulling the envelope from its hiding spot, I scanned the contact number on the itinerary and called, disguising my voice just enough to avoid suspicion. "Yes, this is David White." I lied smoothly. "I'm confirming the details for the romantic weekend package booked under Elena White." The operator cheerfully confirmed the reservation, going so far as to list the villa's address and arrival times. Then she added the final blow. "We're thrilled to host Mr. and Mrs. Jacobs this weekend," she said brightly. "Is there anything else I can assist you with?" My stomach twisted. Mrs. Jacobs. That wasn't my name. My wife had chosen someone else for the weekend. By the time Friday evening rolled around, I had formulated a plan. Elena packed her bags with the same calm efficiency she always did, kissing me goodbye like nothing was amiss. I watched her car disappear down the driveway, my chest a storm of fury and determination. I didn't follow her right away. Instead, I waited for the cover of night before heading to the villa, armed with the tools I needed to ensure her perfect weekend ended in disaster. My heart pounded as I drove, the scenic roads leading me closer to the truth, and the confrontation I knew was coming. When I arrived, the villa stood bathed in moonlight, its grandeur a stark contrast to the seething rage that churned inside me. I parked a distance away, blending into the shadows as I watched the scene unfold. Two figures emerged on the balcony, Elena and a man I didn't recognize. They were laughing, their glasses clinking in a toast. For a moment, I froze, my breath catching in my throat. But then the anger surged, burning away any hesitation. I wasn't here to wallow in heartbreak. I was here to end it all. The key moment had come and gone, but my story was far from over. As I watched my wife toast to her new life with another man, a single thought crystallized in my mind. This ends tonight. I sat in the shadows, the distant sound of their laughter slicing through the crisp night air. The villa's glow spilled onto the driveway, illuminating the rented luxury cars parked neatly outside. My knuckles were white as I gripped the wheel, my chest heaving with each breath. Elena was in there with him, the man she had chosen over me. For the weekend, for our marriage, for everything. But I wasn't here to cry. I was here to take back control. I killed the engine and stepped out of the car, taking care to remain in the shadows. The villa was surrounded by a grove of trees, their dense branches forming a natural curtain around the property. I moved silently, my footsteps muffled by the soft ground beneath me. In my bag were all the tools I needed to turn their idyllic weekend into a living nightmare. It was the smallest details that told the story. Through the wide glass doors, I could see them lounging on a plush sofa. Elena's laugh echoed faintly as she leaned into him, her hand resting casually on his thigh. He looked younger than I expected, his dark hair slicked back, his tailored shirt unbuttoned just enough to project confidence. The sight made my stomach churn. I wanted to charge in and tear the illusion apart, but I forced myself to hold back. Confrontation would come, but not yet. First, I needed to dismantle their perfect moment piece by piece. I circled the villa, finding a utility shed tucked away near the back. Inside, I found exactly what I was looking for, the breaker panel. With the flick of a few switches, the villa was plunged into darkness. I smiled grimly, imagining their confusion as the lights went out. Sure enough, a moment later, I heard muffled voices from inside. "What happened?" the man asked, his voice tinged with annoyance. "Maybe it's just a power cut," Elena replied, her tone uneasy. "Let me check." I stepped back into the shadows as he emerged from the villa, his phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. He was tall, with the kind of arrogance that radiated from his every movement. He looked like a man who thought he had the world, and someone else's wife, at his feet. As he approached the shed, I slipped around to the opposite side of the villa. The front door was unlocked. Amateurs. I stepped inside, my pulse pounding in my ears. The villa was just as opulent inside as it looked from the outside. High ceilings, marble floors, and expensive artwork filled the space. But I wasn't here to admire the decor. I moved quickly, placing small audio recorders in strategic locations. Under the sofa cushions, behind the bar, and near the bedroom door. Each device was primed to capture their conversations, their whispers, their betrayals. My final act before slipping out was to leave a little message for Elena. In the bedroom, I opened her suitcase and carefully placed a single photograph on top of her clothes. It was from our wedding day. Her in her white dress, me in my tux, both of us laughing as confetti rained down around us. On the back, I wrote 3 words in bold, black ink. "I know everything." Outside, I crouched in the bushes, waiting for him to return. When he finally did, muttering something about nothing being wrong with the breakers, I saw the tension in his movements. Elena greeted him at the door, her voice low but tinged with worry. "Maybe it's just the area," she said. "Let's not let it ruin the night." He nodded, forcing a smile as they stepped back inside. I waited until they settled again, their shadows visible through the sheer curtains. Then I made my next move. The villa's Wi-Fi network was laughably easy to breach. Within minutes, I had access to their streaming services, their smart lighting system, even the thermostat. I started small, dimming the lights and turning the thermostat down until the air inside the villa grew noticeably colder. Their silhouettes moved as they fiddled with the controls, trying to figure out what was wrong. When the lights began flickering, I imagined their nerves beginning to fray. Elena's voice was muffled, but I could hear the edge of panic creeping into her tone. "Something's not right," she said. "It's like—" Her words cut off as I played my next card. Using the villa's Bluetooth speakers, I began streaming an audio file I'd prepared earlier. My voice, calm but chilling, echoing through every room. "I know what you're doing, Elena," it began. "You thought you could hide, but I see everything. I know everything." Her scream pierced the night, and I couldn't help but smile. Inside, the scene descended into chaos. Elena bolted from the sofa, clutching her phone as she frantically dialed a number. The man, her weekend companion, paced the room, shouting into the air as if demanding an unseen force to show itself. "I don't know what's happening," Elena cried into the phone, her voice shaking. "It's like someone's here. Someone was here, and I wasn't going anywhere." The night stretched on as I continued my psychological assault. Small disruptions, a flicker of the lights, a creak of the floorboards, kept them on edge. Their perfect weekend was unraveling, their stolen moments tainted by fear. But this was only the beginning. The next move would be the one that shattered them completely. I wasn't just here to scare them. I was here to destroy them. Their fear was palpable, and it fueled me like nothing else. From my vantage point outside the villa, I could see the cracks forming in their carefully constructed facade. Elena paced the living room, clutching her phone as if it were a lifeline, while her lover stood by the window, his silhouette sharp against the flickering lights. They didn't know it yet, but their perfect weekend had become a nightmare. And I wasn't even close to done. Elena's voice carried faintly through the night as she argued with someone over the phone. "No, you don't understand," she said, her words clipped and panicked. "It's not just the power. Someone's messing with us. I'm not imagining this." Her lover turned, his tone harsh as he snapped at her. "Would you stop overreacting? It's probably just a system glitch." The arrogance in his voice made my blood boil. He was trying to assert control, to calm her down, but I could see it in his posture. The stiffness in his shoulders, the way his hand twitched at his side. He was just as rattled as she was. I waited until he moved closer to her, trying to reassure her with a hand on her arm. Then I made my next move. The villa's security system had a built-in intercom, and it took only a few keystrokes to hijack it. My voice rang out through every speaker in the house, low and deliberate. "Elena," I said, drawing her name out slowly. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" The reaction was immediate. Elena shrieked, spinning around as if expecting to see me standing behind her. The man, the stranger who dared to think he could take my place, froze, his face pale beneath the dim light. "Who the hell is that?" he demanded, his voice breaking. I didn't give them a chance to regroup. I triggered the next phase of my plan, sending the lights into a strobe-like frenzy. Shadows danced wildly across the walls, twisting their surroundings into a chaotic blur. At the same time, I played a recording of static-laced whispers through the speakers, each phrase distorted but just clear enough to send shivers down their spines. "Liar. Betrayer. I see you." The man stumbled back, his bravado crumbling. "What kind of sick joke is this?" he shouted, but his voice cracked under the weight of his fear. Elena was trembling now, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. "David," she whispered, her voice trembling. "David, if you're here, please." I cut her off with another burst of static, followed by a chilling laugh I'd pre-recorded just for this moment. It echoed through the villa, bouncing off the walls like a specter in the dark. While they scrambled to make sense of their unraveling reality, I moved silently around the perimeter of the villa. The night was my ally, cloaking my movements as I approached the terrace. Through the glass doors, I could see them both, their nerves frayed, their unity shattered. He was trying to console her now, his hands gripping her shoulders as he murmured something meant to calm her down. It didn't matter what he said. I knew the truth. This wasn't love. It was lust wrapped in stolen moments, a fantasy they had crafted at my expense, and I was about to rip it apart. I used my access to the villa's smart system to unlock the terrace door. It slid open with a soft hiss, the sound barely audible over the whispers still playing through the speakers. Neither of them noticed as I stepped inside, keeping to the shadows. The room smelled of wine and desperation. A half-empty bottle sat on the coffee table, its crimson contents reflecting the chaotic glow of the lights. Elena had her back to me, her lover standing between us like some pathetic shield. He glanced toward the terrace, his eyes narrowing as he caught the faint movement of the door. "Did you?" he started, his voice faltering. He pushed past Elena and moved toward the terrace, peering into the darkness. I ducked out of sight, circling around to the opposite side of the room. "Elena," I called out again, my voice low and taunting. "Do you regret it yet?" Her breath hitched, and she spun around, her eyes wide with terror. "David," she gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. The man turned back toward her, his confusion morphing into anger. "Who is this guy?" he demanded. "What the hell is going on?" Before she could answer, I stepped into the light, my presence sending a shockwave through the room. Elena staggered back, her hand flying to her mouth as she stared at me. Her lover took a step forward, his fists clenching as if he thought he could intimidate me. "David," Elena began, her voice cracking. This isn't." "Save it," I snarled, cutting her off. My eyes locked on the man beside her. "And you? Did you think I wouldn't find out? That you could just waltz into my life and take what's mine?" He squared his shoulders, his fear replaced by misplaced arrogance. "Look, man, I don't know what your problem is, but—" My laughter stopped him cold. It was a hollow, bitter sound, filled with all the rage I had bottled up over the past week. "My problem?" I stepped closer, towering over him. "My problem is that you thought you could humiliate me, that you could take my wife and parade her around like some trophy. But you're about to learn how wrong you are." The room descended into chaos as I laid out my next move. The recordings I had placed earlier began playing on loop, snippets of their conversations from the past months. Elena's voice, laughing, whispering secrets she thought I'd never hear. His voice, full of smug confidence as he planned their little rendezvous. Their faces turned ghostly white as they realized the extent of what I knew. And this was just the beginning. By the time I was done, they wouldn't just regret their weekend. They would regret ever meeting me. The room was steeped in a suffocating tension. Elena's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came. The man, her so-called companion, took a step back, his earlier arrogance now replaced with uncertainty. My presence had shattered whatever illusion they'd built in this villa, and I intended to grind it into dust. The recordings I'd planted earlier played on loop, echoing their stolen moments through the house. Elena's voice spilled from the speakers. "It's just a weekend. He'll never know." Her lover's reply followed, laced with smug confidence. "Even if he does, what's he going to do? He's not your keeper." The venom in his words reignited the fury I had been suppressing. I took a step forward, letting the weight of my presence fill the room. "Not my keeper?" I repeated, my voice calm but sharp as a blade. "Let's test that theory, shall we?" Her lover, let's call him Mark, though I didn't know or care if that was his real name, tried to reclaim his bravado. He squared his shoulders and crossed his arms, but his shifting stance betrayed him. "Listen, man," Mark started, his tone patronizing. "I don't know what you think you're doing here, but you need to leave. This is between me and Elena." I barked out a laugh, the sound echoing coldly. "Between you and Elena? You're standing in the middle of my life, my marriage, and you think this is just between the two of you?" Mark faltered, but before he could respond, Elena stepped forward, her hands trembling as she reached toward me. "David," she whispered, her voice pleading, "please let me explain." "Explain what?" I snapped, turning my gaze on her. "How you lied to my face. How you packed a bag and drove off to play house with this nobody." Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I didn't mean for this to happen. You just what?" I interrupted, my voice rising. Wanted a thrill? Thought I wouldn't notice? Or did you convince yourself I didn't deserve the truth? Mark, apparently deciding to dig his own grave, tried to interject again. Hey, maybe you should calm down. I rounded on him, my eyes narrowing. Calm down? You're giving me advice on how to behave after you've been sleeping with my wife. I didn't know she was married, he protested, though his hesitation suggested otherwise. Don't lie to me, I growled, my voice low and dangerous. You knew exactly what you were doing. The only thing you didn't know was how this would end. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulling out the small leather-bound notebook I'd brought with me. Inside were the damning details I'd uncovered over the past week. Dates, text transcripts, and photos. I tossed it onto the coffee table, the pages spilling open to reveal their treachery. Elena's hand flew to her mouth as she stared at the evidence. Mark leaned over, his face draining of color as he scanned the damning pages. How did you? Elena began, her voice barely audible. Because I'm not the fool you took me for. I spat, cutting her off. You thought you could hide this? Sneak around behind my back? No, Elena. I saw it all. And now, so will everyone else. Her eyes widened in horror. What do you mean? I smiled coldly. This villa has Wi-Fi, doesn't it? Every recording, every conversation, every disgusting little moment. It's already been uploaded. To the cloud. To backups. To people who will ensure the truth can't be buried. Her breath hitched, and she turned to Mark, who was now pale and visibly trembling. You didn't tell me he was crazy, he hissed, his voice cracking under the pressure. I didn't tell you because I didn't think he'd find out, she snapped, her tears giving way to panic. Oh, I found out, I said, my voice steady as I leaned against the arm of the sofa. And you know what else I found? That you two aren't the only ones in this web of lies. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. The speakers crackled to life again, this time with the voice of another man. One of the others Elena had entertained before this weekend. Mark's head snapped toward her, his expression darkening. What the hell is this? He demanded, pointing at her. There's someone else? Elena's face turned ghostly pale. Mark, I can explain. No, let me, I interrupted, relishing the chaos I'd unleashed. You weren't special, Mark. You were just the flavor of the week. The same line she fed you? She's fed them to others. The room descended into shouting, Mark hurling accusations while Elena dissolved into sobs. I stepped back, letting the storm rage around me. This wasn't about reconciliation or forgiveness. It was about stripping away their lies and leaving them exposed. When the shouting subsided, Mark turned to me, his expression a mixture of anger and desperation. You've made your point, he said through gritted teeth. Now get out. I smirked, shaking my head. Oh no, Mark. I'm not leaving. You are. What? He barked. You heard me, I said, crossing my arms. Get out of my house. This isn't your. It's my wife, my marriage, and now it's my show, I growled, stepping closer. So pack your things, Mark. Because the next time I see you, it won't end with a conversation. He hesitated, his jaw tightening. Finally, he grabbed his coat and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Elena sank to the floor, her tears falling in silent streams. David, she whimpered. Please, just listen. But I was done listening. The reckoning wasn't over yet, and this was just the start of her nightmare. The air in the villa was heavy with the aftermath of the confrontation. Elena sat on the floor, her shoulders shaking as silent sobs racked her body. Mark had stormed out, his car screeching down the gravel driveway, and the house seemed to exhale in his absence. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. I watched her for a moment, her once pristine composure reduced to nothing but raw, unfiltered guilt. She glanced up at me, her tear-streaked face pleading for mercy. David, she whispered, her voice hoarse. I don't know what to say. Please, just let me explain. I leaned against the edge of the sofa, crossing my arms as I regarded her coldly. Explain? I think you've said enough already. Every lie, every betrayal, it's all been captured. What more could you possibly add? Her hands trembled as she tried to wipe the tears from her face. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she stammered. It was a mistake. Something stupid that got out of control. I laughed bitterly. Got out of control? Elena, this wasn't a one-time slip. You planned this. You booked a villa. You packed a bag. You lied to my face. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Over and over again, you chose this. Her sobs grew louder, but I refused to let her tears soften me. Not now. Not ever. As I stood there, I felt the weight of my actions settle over me. I had exposed her, torn apart the facade she had built with Mark, and set in motion a reckoning she couldn't escape. But something still felt off. A nagging voice in the back of my mind told me there was more to this story than I had uncovered. And then I saw it. On the far side of the room, her phone buzzed where it lay on the coffee table. The screen lit up, and a single notification appeared. New message. Unknown number. My instincts kicked in immediately. Elena's gaze flicked to the phone, her panic unmistakable. What's that? I asked, my voice sharp. Nothing, she said quickly, reaching for the phone. But I was faster. I snatched it off the table before she could get to it. David, don't, she began. But I held up a hand to silence her. The message preview on the screen was short but damning. I can't believe he showed up. Did you tell him about us yet? I raised an eyebrow, my stomach twisting with a mixture of anger and confusion. About us? I repeated, reading the message aloud. Who's this from, Elena? Her face paled, her lips trembling as she struggled to form a response. It's not what you think. Oh, it's never what I think, is it? I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. Let's find out together. I unlocked the phone, using the passcode I'd guessed correctly weeks ago, and opened the message thread. What I saw made my blood run cold. The texts weren't from Mark. They were from someone else entirely, a man named Evan. The messages dated back months, detailing secret meetings, intimate moments, and conversations far more incriminating than anything I'd uncovered about Mark. This wasn't just a weekend affair. This was a double life. Elena, I said slowly, my voice dangerously calm. Who is Evan? Her silence was deafening. The room spun as the pieces began to fall into place. Mark wasn't the first, and he clearly wasn't the only one. Evan had been in the picture long before this weekend, a shadowy presence I hadn't even noticed. I scrolled through the messages, each one a dagger to the heart. Evan, I don't know how much longer we can keep this up. He's bound to find out eventually. Elena, David won't. He's too trusting, too predictable, too trusting, too predictable. The words burned in my chest, fueling the inferno that had been raging inside me since the moment I discovered the truth. I turned to her, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. So this is it, isn't it? Mark was just a pawn in your little game. But Evan, he's the real deal. How long, Elena? How long have you been lying to me? Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head. David, How long? I roared, slamming the phone onto the table. Over a year, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But it wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't mean to hurt you. The room fell into a deafening silence. Over a year. My wife had been living a double life for over a year, lying to my face, sharing a bed with another man, while I had been oblivious. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The weight of her betrayal pressed down on me like a vice. But then, like a flash of lightning, clarity struck. This wasn't just about her anymore. Evan, this faceless, nameless man, was part of this too, and he wouldn't get away with it. Elena, I said, my voice colder than ice. Call him. What? She stammered, her eyes widening in fear. You heard me, I snapped. Call him. Put him on speaker. Let's see how much your precious Evan has to say. Her hands shook as she picked up the phone, her thumb hovering over his name in the contacts. David, please don't do this. Do it, or I'll do it for you. I growled, my patience wearing thin. With a trembling breath, she pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice. Then a man's voice answered, smooth and confident. Elena? Is everything okay? I leaned closer to the phone, my voice cutting through the line like a blade. Everything's fine, Evan. But things are about to get very interesting. The silence on the other end was deafening. The silence on the line stretched, heavy and suffocating. Elena sat frozen, her face as pale as a ghost, her hands trembling in her lap. On the other end, Evan remained silent for a moment too long, the confidence in his initial tone evaporating like steam. Then, finally, he spoke. "Who the hell is this?" His voice carried a hint of forced bravado, but I could hear the crack in it. I leaned over the phone, my words slow and deliberate. "This is the husband. The man you thought you could deceive while you played house with my wife." Another pause. I could almost hear him calculating, weighing his options. "Look, man," he began, his tone shifting to one of rehearsed calm. "I don't know what she told you, but—" "Oh, she didn't have to tell me much." I cut him off. "I have everything I need. Texts, photos, dates, every little detail of the lie you've both been living." Elena let out a soft sob beside me, her hands covering her face. I ignored her. This moment wasn't about her tears or her guilt. It was about him. About bringing this coward out from the shadows he thought would protect him. "Where are you?" I demanded, my voice low and deadly. "I want you to say this to my face." Evan scoffed, a pathetic attempt to sound unaffected. "I don't think that's necessary. Clearly, you're upset." I slammed my hand down on the table, making Elena jump. "Damn right I'm upset. You think you can just slink away? That this will blow over? Not a chance." Evan hesitated again, his bravado waning. "Look, I'll talk to you, okay? But not like this." The conversation ended with Evan reluctantly agreeing to meet me. I gave him a time and place, a neutral spot at a downtown bar. I knew he wouldn't show up at my house. Men like him don't step into the lion's den willingly. Elena tried to stop me as I grabbed my keys, her tearful apologies falling on deaf ears. "David, please," she begged, grabbing my arm. "This isn't going to fix anything. Don't do this." I pulled away, my voice as cold as steel. "You're right, Elena. This won't fix anything. But it'll make sure he understands exactly what happens when you destroy someone's life." Her sobs followed me as I walked out the door. The bar was dimly lit, the kind of place that offered privacy in exchange for overpriced drinks. I arrived early, choosing a table in the corner where I could see the entrance. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. My anger simmered, coiled tight like a spring. Finally, Evan walked in. He was exactly what I expected. Well-dressed, polished, the kind of man who thought his charm and good looks could shield him from consequences. His eyes scanned the room nervously until they landed on me. For a moment, he hesitated, then squared his shoulders and approached. "David," he greeted, his tone cautious. "I'm here, just like you asked." "Sit," I said, pointing to the chair across from me. He obeyed, his movements deliberate, as if trying to project calm. But I could see the tension in his jaw, the slight twitch in his hand as he adjusted his watch. We stared at each other for a moment, the weight of everything unspoken hanging between us. Finally, I broke the silence. "You've been sleeping with my wife for over a year," I said, my voice steady. "And you thought you'd get away with it." Evan exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. "Look, I'm not going to deny it. I didn't handle this the right way. But relationships are complicated. Maybe there's a reason she—" I slammed my fist on the table, cutting him off. "Don't you dare try to justify this. You don't get to twist this into some story about why you're the good guy." He raised his hands in mock surrender. "All right, fine. I screwed up. I admit it. What do you want from me?" I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. "I want you to understand the damage you've done, the lives you've shattered. And I want you to know that this isn't over." The conversation escalated, my voice rising as I laid bare every piece of evidence I had against him. His initial calm facade cracked, and I saw the fear creeping into his eyes. He hadn't expected me to come at him like this, hadn't anticipated the depths of my resolve. "I've sent everything to your wife," I said, my words hitting him like a hammer. "She knows. About the texts, the photos. All of it." Evan's face drained of color. You told her? Of course I did. I spat. She deserves to know who you really are. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. What do you want me to do? I don't want anything from you, I said, standing up and towering over him. I've already taken what I need. Your reputation? Gone. Your marriage? Over. And your life? Well, that's up to you to rebuild. Evan didn't follow me as I walked out of the bar. He sat there, staring at the table, his world crumbling around him. It was a fitting end for a man who thought he could steal another's life without consequence. When I got home, Elena was waiting for me, her eyes red and swollen. She looked at me like she was about to say something, but I held up a hand. Don't, I said. There's nothing left to say. The papers will be ready by the end of the week. Her sobs filled the silence as I walked past her, but they didn't move me. I had done what I needed to do, and now, it was time to start rebuilding what was left of my life, without her. The silence in the house was oppressive, broken only by the faint sound of Elena's sobs behind the closed door of the guest room. She had tried, once again, to speak to me earlier that morning, but I had no words left for her. The wreckage of our marriage lay around us like shards of broken glass, impossible to piece back together, and far too dangerous to touch. The divorce papers had been drawn up and delivered. All that remained was for her to sign them, a formality that would put the final nail in the coffin of our relationship. I no longer felt anger or sorrow, only a cold, distant clarity. I had won this battle, but victory had come at a cost. That afternoon, I received a message from Helena, Evan's wife. She had been quiet since I sent her the evidence, choosing to process the betrayal on her own terms. But now, she was ready to speak. David, thank you for telling me the truth. It was hard to hear, but I deserve to know. If you're free, I'd like to meet and talk. I replied with a simple, of course, and we arranged to meet at a quiet cafe downtown. The irony wasn't lost on me. Two strangers, connected by the wreckage of our spouse's deceit, coming together to find some semblance of closure. Helena was already seated when I arrived, a cup of tea cradled in her hands. She looked composed but weary, the weight of the past week evident in the faint lines around her eyes. I joined her, offering a polite nod as I sat down. Thank you for coming, she said, her voice soft but steady. Thank you for reaching out, I replied. I know this hasn't been easy. She shook her head, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of her lips. No, it hasn't. But at least now I know. I spent so long wondering if something was wrong, convincing myself I was imagining things. You gave me the truth, even if it hurt. I nodded, understanding her pain all too well. The truth isn't always easy, but it's better than living in the dark. We sat in silence for a moment, the shared weight of our experiences hanging between us. Then, she spoke again. I've decided to file for divorce, she said, her tone resolute. Evan tried to talk me out of it, of course. He said it was a mistake, that he could change. But I can't. I won't go back to living that lie. You're stronger than he gave you credit for, I said, admiration evident in my voice. It takes courage to walk away. She smiled faintly, her eyes meeting mine. And you? What's next for you? I took a deep breath, considering her question. I've started the divorce process with Elena. I don't know what's next, but I know I can't stay in the past. It's time to move forward. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. Sometimes, the only way to rebuild is to let the ruins crumble completely. Our conversation stretched into the afternoon, flowing with a surprising ease. We shared our stories, our frustrations, and even a few bitter laughs at the absurdity of it all. By the time we parted ways, I felt lighter, as though a small piece of the burden had been lifted. Thank you, David, Helena said as we stood outside the cafe. I hope you find peace. You deserve it. You too, I replied. Take care of yourself. She smiled, a flicker of hope shining through the pain. And with that, we went our separate ways. That evening, I returned home to find Elena gone. Her suitcase was missing from the guest room, and the house felt emptier than it had in years. On the kitchen counter, she had left a note. I hesitated before picking it up, unsure if I even wanted to read her final words. But curiosity won out. David, I'm sorry for everything. I know I've destroyed what we had, and I'll never forgive myself for the pain I caused you. I'm leaving because it's the right thing to do. You deserve a fresh start, without me holding you back. I hope one day you can find happiness again. Helena. I set the note down, my emotions a confusing mix of relief and melancholy. Her departure marked the true end of our life together, but it also signaled the beginning of something new, something better. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding. I threw myself into my work, reconnected with old friends, and began to rediscover the parts of myself I had lost over the years. The wounds of betrayal didn't heal overnight, but with time, they began to fade, leaving behind scars that served as reminders of my resilience. Helena and I stayed in touch, our shared experience forming an unexpected bond. We weren't rushing into anything, not after what we had both been through, but there was a quiet understanding between us, a glimmer of possibility that neither of us was ready to ignore. One evening, as I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the city lights twinkle against the night sky, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The storm had passed, and though the landscape of my life was forever changed, I was still standing. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed that the future held something worth looking forward to.